Welcome everyone to the Nebula House, the chapter room. Happy New Year. This is our first meeting in like 2 months now, 3 months. And we have a very interesting book and we have been reading. That's the book of Job. It's in the Bible. Yes. I know you wonder how we went from man's search for meaning, metamorphosis, and suddenly we are now looking at a very interesting character in the Bible, the book, the Job. And this is not just a biblical book or a spiritual book. I think it has a lot of philosophical undertone. And we're in a particular period in the Nebula House where we're looking at existentialism, the search for meaning, how to handle pain and suffering. You see a lot of that even in our Nebula House Academy. And throughout the month of January, me and two other friends, Kenneth, who is a pastor at Vidify Ministry, and Joshua, my very close friend, who's also a lawyer, we have spent the last 4 weeks reading the book of Job. We have dealt with the understanding of the pain that Job had went through, and we're here to discuss. Now, this is the idea. The main purpose of the chapter room is not for us to seem intelligent, but for us to be bold enough to realize that we may not be as wise as we think we are, and through that seek more knowledge. So we encourage you as we go through the book of Job and any other book in the chapter room that you're encouraged to not only read, but unlearn and relearn. So, thank you, Kenneth, and thank you, Joshua.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
So one question. What was your reading experience like? I'll start from you. What was your reading experience like for the book of Job? I think like 42 chapters. What was your reading experience like? And what was the most important suffering that Job went through? So that's for you, and then...
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed these sessions, and this was a really enjoyable one, particularly for me, because this is not the first time I read it. I think the first time I read it, I was under 6. So to encounter that, the themes that are contained there, yes, I read before I was 6. Whoa. I read before.
What happened?
So I started. So what introduced me? You know. Funnily, we used to have this yellow book, my book of Bible story, which a lot of kids in Nigeria had growing up, and so I saw the story, and it was kind of, my mind could not contain what, like, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. Yeah. So I went to the Bible to understand, okay, what was going on, because they didn't have the full, it was just except in that book. Mm-hmm. And so the first time I saw it, I was like, this is so unfair, playing chess with somebody's life.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure I totally appreciated it as a kid. So now I've read it other times since then, but anytime I have to read it, I really appreciate it because it gives me some sort of insight into the human experience, into the fact that suffering, anxiety are a part of human life, regardless of whether you believe that God is sovereign and controls everything. You know how a lot of people argue that, if God is sovereign, why do people suffer? Mm-hmm. So that's a common argument that you encounter every time. Exactly. And so when you read this book, you see that the Bible doesn't even deny the fact that suffering is an intrinsic part of human experience. Mm-hmm. And so what was most interesting for me, and what I think was a very important learning point that I gained from this book, was the fact that the world is bigger than you. So I would glean this from God's response to Job. Mm-hmm. Instead of answering his questions as to why he was suffering, God posed certain questions to him as to his understanding of the universe. God talks about very dangerous creatures that he created, and it quizzes him. If I created those things, what makes you think you can understand how the suffering is? So I think the point was trying to drive across is, you are a part of a whole. The suffering that you encounter is not meant to destroy you, obviously, because if not, what's the point of faith? Yeah. But it's to make you understand that these sufferings exist, and you as a person, as an individual, you are strong enough to surmount them and come out better for it. So that's a
very brilliant. That's a very brilliant. I mean, I never thought about it in that being part of a whole, because for me, when I read the book, the only thing that made sense of Job's suffering was that God made a bet with the devil, and we'll get to that. But for me, it's like, why do you even have to do that? Like, the first question is, what is the devil doing in heaven's court?
So this is how I think of it. It's funny, literally. It was funny. That was one of the things that blew my mind as a kid.
What's the devil doing in heaven's court? I'm like that.
But I mean, the way I see it, I feel like was in a realm. It was what do you mean by heaven? It was like a realm.
We get it. It may not be quite
yeah.
nature. So, Kenneth, what's your own experience like, and what is the most important take you would take? Like your experience in reading it. I mean, you're a pastor. I'm sure you have done a deeper dive into it, but your experience reading it, and what is the thing that resonates with you the most? In the
Just like Josh, I think my first encounter with this book was I was very upset, right? It moved from being upset to like, I think everybody can relate to Job, except for like 2,000 plus animals, because that's a lot of wealth. Like I can't relate to that. But like this guy was wealthy and went through the deep human experience that many of us do. But I was upset, and when I was still unsure whether God existed or not in my secondary school time, this was one of those books that still shouted, "Yeah, even if he exists, maybe he can't be trusted." Can sell you literally to the devil and make a bargain on your life without your permission. And I'm like, this is very hard to wrestle through. But I think one thing that stands out to me amongst others is the serendipity of his story and also the insight to what happens behind the scenes many times, because it interests me when I talk to people about God's existence or just does God exist and all the arguments, theological arguments and all of that. I find that people don't argue with the fact that if there's a physical world, there has to be a spiritual or paraphysical world that seeded this world, something beyond the physical. If there are human beings, there has to be something beyond human beings that brought us here, and people are like fine with it. So this gives me a glimpse, like there are things that happen behind the scenes that we don't even see that literally link to the outcome of our lives. I see the devil doing stuff. Like, the Bible says in 1 Peter 5:8 that he moves about looking for whom to devour. And it was very interesting. In chapter 1, the Lord asked the devil, "Where are you coming from?" And he said, "From to and fro." So like this has been his JD from time, it's 9 to 9, looking for whom to devour, and he found Job. And many people might say, why does God allow suffering? This is just a preview. Like, God was not responsible for Job's suffering. I think it's very important to look at that, and I'll explain why.
Okay.
When Paul talks about the thorn in his flesh, and he prays to God, "Take away the thorn in my flesh," God does not take away the thorn in his flesh. We find out that the thorn is persecution that he's facing. He said, "The messenger from Satan."
Yes.
So you start to think, there's a messenger from Satan opposing God's chosen man for the hour, Paul. Why is God not doing anything about it? All he's doing is there's grace for you. And then now God's man for the hour in this time in the land of Oz is Job, and the devil wants to attack him and his life and his family, and it doesn't seem like God is prohibiting it.
But what I find interesting, and it's just, it's not like the devil wanted to attack him. It is, have you considered? So that's the thing that like, because Job didn't show up, the devil didn't show up and say, "You know what?
There's a guy called
Job.
But again, we're talking about God.
Well, yeah.
Did God know
that the devil?
Like, it was a rhetorical question. Have you considered? And then the devil responds by saying, "I know Job. There's a hedge around him." So it was not as if there was missing knowledge. He knew already. And just like Jesus in his earthly ministry would say, knowing the thoughts of their hearts, he responded. I believe that this was not an abstract thing. The devil came for a reason. There's a guy that you've covered. I want him. And just like every other thing, because God, in allowing free will, evil has to happen if free will happens. Even celestial beings have their will to do certain things. But he said his life cannot be touched in the whole process. But I know we'll talk about it, but that's what stood out to me, behind
his life,
the scenes and the life, the serendipity of his life.
So to answer the same question, the first time I read, I've read the book a couple of times in parts when I was younger, but the first time I sat with the book of Job, I think I read it end to end was when I was going through a very difficult time in my life, depressed, suicidal and all. And I remember saying, okay, my life is going so terribly, and it looks like around me, I'm the one that has the worst possible life. Let me go and meet the man whose life is an epitome of suffering. And so I opened the book of Job, and since then I think I've read it like 8 times. And every single time I read the book of Job, the idea of the devil showing up at the heavens court, I struggle with it because because it's like holiness, God, the angels, everything holy is the representative. And now reading about it now with my mind, I don't see them as events. I don't see them just as events anymore. I see them as symbols, meaning the heavens court is holy, perfect, everything that can be good. And then the devil is a representative of everything that can be bad, and he shows up. So it's like a black dot in a white canvas, right? Shows up and is asking, or it presents itself as the thing that opposes the entire court, right, of heaven. And then I see that at that point I wonder why didn't the angels, like, I mean, not to be dramatic, but Angel Gabriel sees the devil coming in immediately. You shouldn't even wait for God to even say, where have you been up and about and all.
Sorry, just to interject. So if you recognize, if you recall in the chapter 1, it says the sons of God came to present themselves to him. So the word sons of God, I think where this understanding comes from is sons of God is interpreted as angels, but I think sons of God, if you look at how the Greek renders it, sons of God is used to typify spiritual beings, heavenly celestial beings specifically. So even the heavens, so it could be exactly. So it could even the heavens doesn't mean it's not interpreted in the way with the sky or where God lives. The heaven is a realm for celestial beings, and so I think it was just a congregation of celestial beings, and the interaction took place.
So correct. But again, it's just like God and devil. But that's my first.
So on surface level, that's what it seems like.
Then what I see is my entire experience. The thing that gets me the most is his friends. I don't know if I'm going to deal that into it, but why because they all represent what they said weren't wrong. They said really interesting things, and there were things that were valid. And reading it, I was like, yeah, these guys are making sense, you know. And then at the end of the chapter, God says, "You guys have sinned against me." And I'm like, okay, who? And you now tell them to go to Job for Job to pray for them. And Job is the one that, in my opinion, said some things that he's like, I'm innocent, you know.
If you're on me,
you court. And one of his friends was saying, how dare you say you can put God in court? And he's the same. And God now tells that particular person who in my opinion, I think that's Eliphaz or so, that I support, and say, go, you have sinned, go and meet Job. And again, please, you guys will have to explain this to me because I've read it several times and it flies over my head. So that's my own reading experience. And the next question we have is, of the three friends, right? Four
friends and then Eli.
So I don't consider Eli a friend. I mean, he's a
I get it.
I don't consider four people. Let's use that, right? But right, what is your take on each of those characters? And who do you see most aligning yourself with? Like, in as much as everybody wants to say it's Eli, but who do you see? What is your, let me make it open. What is your understanding and your interpretation of those friends and the interaction with Job? So maybe you can take one person and he takes another person, or you can just do a summary of four of them, however you please.
Okay. So I would say I will not speak to a specific one. I'll just speak in general. About friends. Now, so what they do is they quiz Job. I feel like one vital thing that is overlooked with that interaction, with the interaction between Job and his friends, is the fact that they were there for him. Yeah. In the midst of his suffering, they were right there throughout. I feel like it may have been more difficult for Job to survive that if he was surviving it alone.
Correct.
So, so that's something I just want to point out before I go into the interaction. Now, if you look through,
I'm just thinking deeply about it. Continue.
If you look through the interaction, you'll see at different points they assume that they understand the way the world works. So is that the righteous don't suffer. If you're suffering, then it's probably because you have committed a sin. Now, you see echoes of this later on in the Bible where Jesus' disciples asked him something. What did they say? This man, he was blind. He was born blind. Whose sin? Is it his sin or is it his parents' sin? Why is he blind? And Jesus said, this man was not blind because of anyone's sin. It was, but because the glory of God should be made manifest in his life. I'm paraphrasing now.
Yeah.
Now, so what does this tell you? This suggests to me that as human beings, there are certain people we encounter. We see them going through stuff.
Right.
We see people from different backgrounds experiencing different situations. It may even be suffering from their incidences that were caused by their own mistakes. But we tend to we quickly judge. This is why this has happened. This is why this has happened. Or this could never be me because I am this perfect guy. Or this guy has cancer, probably smoked, and he's got this lung cancer, and I don't smoke. But you don't know. So I think one of the key things that stood out in the interaction, yes, they were valid. They were valid because it was like, based on the way the world works, based on experience, we know that when someone suffers, that means God is not with him. Even Job makes that assumption because that's why I don't judge the friends myself, because while Job was speaking, his own position was based on the fact that I have been righteous. So why is this happening to me, God? Like, you have decided, there was a statement he made, you have decided to pervert justice to me, something like that. And it's so, when I look at the interaction, I just see it as a regular human. They were friends, so they could call each other out. They could say, don't lie to us. If you have not done anything, this will not happen to you. So I don't see it as a terrible stance that they've taken. I see it as friends just being plain with each other. Maybe they were not the best of friends in the sense that they didn't comfort him in his time of need, but they were truthful to him about how they felt. And I think that's probably why he forgave them quickly when God told him, oh, pray for them, and he prayed for them. So in general, I just think it's about them being parochial with their view of the world and how it works. But I don't think it's peculiar to them. As human beings, we all suffer from that. And so that's my take on that interaction.
Very, 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 very brilliant point. You see, the thing that gets me the most in the interaction with his friends is the part where he said, and they sat with him in silence for 7 days.
Yeah.
And you made a very salient point that said you don't think that Job would have gone through what he went through with his friend. And what I take from that, the lesson I take from that particular verse is that sometimes when we meet people suffering or meet people at their dark times, we always want to be very prescriptive.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just want to be there and be silent. And be silent. Just, in during our academy sessions, someone had asked, okay, when you're going through when your friend is going through hard times and you don't understand the suffering, what kind of, I think sometimes the presence is all you need. And the fact that you were able to stay for 7 days. Now, silent for 7 days, 7 nights, maybe then after that, Job breaks the silence by speaking. Now, the question is, maybe it took Job so long a time to even understand his own suffering.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe even took him so long a time to even get comfortable enough to even speak to his friend. So that's another thing about the friendship. I never thought about it in that light, which was a very brilliant point you made. Maybe Job wouldn't have survived that without his friends. And then, so very salient point. So is there anyone?
So I think amongst Eliphaz or Zophar or Bildad, I think they have a common theme. They love Job. Yeah, it's clear. Like what you said is absolutely true. Like you will not spend that much time, effort, or maybe who knows? Hey, again, maybe he's wealthy, so motivations might differ. But then he lost everything. So at least the fact that they stayed. They were there, even though maybe others were not.
Yeah.
It says a lot. They were there through the roughest times. But I think this is what we do many times. We probe for what could be when things go wrong. Is it me, Jesus? Like, am I the one? Like, am I the problem? And then, but I see the book of Job starts out somehow. It says, now Job was a righteous man. And soon after we realize that as the narrative starts to unfold, he's really not as righteous as we think. And if anything, he's self-righteous, which is also a problem, right? He starts to challenge God. He starts to say, oh God, look, I'm probably more righteous than you because you're misjudging me in this time right now. What have I done to you? And the Lord starts to expose to him, like, who are you to speak concerning these things you don't even understand? This is life. And ultimately, God even proved his justice by making all things good in time. So I feel like many of us get to a point where we are just questioning what actually went wrong in my life, who is at fault. And I think just trusting God through. Like trust is proven not just in the good times.
Yeah.
How can I tell your trust is genuine? Also, when things don't go the way they should. So I think I appreciate the friends for at least trying to do that. But I think Elihu just bringing that balance in the end, challenge them. You guys are old people, but no sense. And just
Elu was like, it was great. I think he just waited for one of them to just spill their rub. They just keep talking. And like, you know what? I'm done. Wisdom doesn't come with age. It's just the guy just starts. Israel the Almighty gives you understanding and all whatnot.
that's incredible because I think that means it is you, he himself, has seen a dimension to God that Job and his friends hadn't seen.
Yeah, fair. But fair point, because there's a pattern in the story where I think it was Eliphaz that had told Job, when other people suffered, you encourage them. So how come in the early part, you encourage them, and now you're here. So the the comment I'm going to make, again, to the same questions I asked you is, I find it interesting if I'm going to just oppose the way Job handles the suffering with the way we typically handle our suffering in this particular postmodernist age, where when something goes wrong, you go to the bar, you go and do something decadent. What I find interesting is that when Job went through suffering, even with his friend, they stayed in it. They didn't, I'm suffering, let me just go and find some escape. So, yeah. But they stayed in it, and Job really went through his suffering by asking questions. And I tell them sometimes you have to ask questions, not arrogantly, right? But he stayed, and I heard this somewhere I think a friend had mentioned this to me, that the reason why God considered Job righteous was because he suffered in his presence, that he didn't suffer outside his presence. So it means he had the opportunity to, this is going bad. You know what, God? Let's wrap it up. Taking his advice of his wife, just curse God, and die. But Job, what I see with Job and his friends is they didn't just say, this is going wrong, let's go and have fun. And, like what people say, don't worry, you get over it, or, time would heal. But you see Job really and his friends really asking, in as much as they didn't get it all right, but they stood in the suffering, they looked around them and said, what exactly have we done wrong? And this is important because when people go through suffering that is of their own mistakes, it's good to sit back and say, why is this happening? Is this happening because I didn't do the job well, or because I'm not educated enough? And they try to fix themselves up. But again, what is interesting with Job's story is that his own story it's from heaven. He doesn't even know the reason why, right? He's just and that leads me to the second, the third question. Now, this may be a bit abstract, a question, but answer it however you please. What do you think? Why do you think Job said, ask for a mediator between him and God? Because I find that very interesting. Like, Job has spoken. You know what? Maybe God is not listening to me. I need someone who I can speak to, that speaks to God. And again, that is a symbolism of the coming of Christ, who becomes the road to, who becomes a mediator between us, and God. So how do you, maybe I'll start from you first. How will you extrapolate that particular verse?
Yeah, man. I think that's indicative of human nature. We have these obstructions to the divine. We have these obstacles that hinder us from connecting to God or a supreme being. And we get to a point where we must reach the end of ourselves, where we know, see, if it's by my efforts and my power and my understanding, there's only so far I can go. I need a bridge. And I think he got to that point. The people of Israel were in slavery for over 400 years. And many of them have gotten comfortable, but those that wanted to seem like, there's no way we can escape unless we have someone to take us from here to where we need to be. And I think Job was in that place and he was like, see, it seems like I'm talking too much. I'm not getting answers. It feels like I'm being judged unfairly. I need a lawyer. I need someone who understands me, who can present my case to God. I need someone. And that was indicative of what we all need, an intercessor, a mediator, a Messiah. So I think that was very, very prophetic. I think it was very prophetic piece. Yeah. I think it's very powerful. And so it just helps us see that, look, there's only so much we can do without the extra help.
So, I would actually give a different question, and it is, would you say that Job, if he suffered, was faithful?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, I would totally say that he was faithful. Now, I feel like a lot of times we don't see our relationship with God as a relationship. So I was talking to a friend last week and I was telling him the reason why a lot of people complain about unanswered prayers is because they see unanswered prayer, they judge prayers by outcomes. They don't judge it for what it is, communication. Communication between two personalities, God and a human being. Obviously, outcomes come out from this communication, but they're supposed to be speaking and hearing.
Yeah.
And so for Job, I feel like he was communicating his feelings about, so this is a relationship I've been with you. I've been seemingly faithful from my own end. So why are you doing this to me? And one thing is, if you look at how God judges righteousness and faithfulness, God doesn't judge it by perfection, in quotes. In fact, Job was described as perfect in that book.
Yeah.
But God doesn't judge it by our own human standards of perfection that you never did anything wrong.
Yeah.
The way God judges it is, in the midst of this thing, did your trust and faith in me waver? That's how God judges faithfulness. In the midst of these things, everything Job said was centered around God's sovereignty still,
Yeah.
and the fact that this has to be inflicted on me or permitted at least by
Yeah.
God.
Very correct.
And I don't know why he's chosen to treat me this way. In fact, instead of Job to really curse God, what he did was he cursed his own breath,
Yeah.
cursed every other thing but God.
Yeah.
Those were not perfect things, for sure. But those are typical of somebody who's loyal and faithful. So he was faithful to God. Now, all he needed at that time was an encounter. He needed God to say something to him. Because if you look at it, God did not really provide any reason for his suffering. Immediately God spoke to him. What did God say? God quizzed him. Do you know about this creature? A lot of questions. And immediately, what did Job say? Say no more, say less. I don't have the power to question you, God. And so it shows you the state of mind that all Job needed was someone to say, I see you, I hear you.
Yeah.
That's all Job needed.
So the answer wasn't necessarily answering his question.
He wasn't answering his question. Yeah.
Getting a response.
Yes.
Yeah.
You see that, you are aware that this is happening to me, your guy. That's what he was saying.
Yeah.
So through it, I feel like what's faithfulness? If we have to define it, faithfulness is you remaining steadfast to someone or something that you believe in. And I don't think for 1 second Job did not believe that God existed or that God was a sovereign being. He probably doubted whether God cared for him as much as God should, but he was there, even in the midst of all. Like he said, he suffered still in God. Yeah. So I think that was very key. And another thing was, even he still had faith, even in the midst of it all. It was like, though he slay me, yet I will trust him.
Yeah.
So he still had,
Yeah. So I think he was having an internal tug of war between himself.
Yeah.
Like, I want to give up, but I cannot give up.
Yeah.
And just to piggyback on what you said, I think what you said was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
With Abraham, many people forget that the father of faith, once upon a time, fell down on the floor and laughed. So Sarah laughed.
Yeah.
But Abraham fell down on his face and laughed. Yet God says he was counted righteous.
Righteous. Yeah.
So,
That's not the one that confuses me still.
okay.
What confuses me still is that the father of faith at the point did not believe God.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And went to that
Have-
your parents on righteousness, but God, like,
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to say. Like, the fact is that when God looks at the overall story, would there be moments of doubt? Would there be shadows of doubt cast? Yes, for sure. Question is, what do you do from that? What is the overall narrative of your life? Did you continue in trust? Because faith is not just the initial investment, it's a lifelong subscription.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to stay the course till the very end. And I think absolutely, I felt Job, I used to beef with him because I was like, this guy, who do you think you are? He's just self-righteous. But he stayed in his questioning, he stayed, and God also said, who are you as clay to question the potter? I'm just using Paul's reference. I can you trust me even in the situations where I'm silent, in the shadows, in the valleys of the shadow of silence, so to speak? Like, will you still trust me in those moments? And I think Job did a pretty good job in pushing through that experience, and it's an encouragement for all of us.
Very, very interesting. So we're going to switch it a little bit. We have spoken about Job, and I want us to elevate it to where, like, in today's world and in today's age. And the reason why I want us to look at it that way, so that our audience are able to draw out lessons. But to even flip it a little bit is, Job was a righteous man and he suffered. To flip it to saying, in today's age, we see people who are not righteous and they are thriving, right? And they are thriving. And it's like, what is happening? Why is this? Why is God playing a particular game? I used to believe that God just says, you know what? Heaven said, we haven't had any humor in the last maybe 1 minute, which is like 1,000 years. Okay, you know what? Let's find someone and let's have a laugh. And that's the way I used to view it before because it didn't just make sense. And the reason I say this is in the last week or 2 weeks, I've had very close friends of mine who have lost family members, people who even the last one we went, the last funeral I went to, my friend's mom, this woman was faithful. Like her life was an embodiment of God's, like servitude to God. And it was the testament of her life. This was someone who found God at the age of 50. This was someone who, from the very beginning, and she had cancer. And during the moment she was diagnosed with cancer, she just believed that God was going to heal her. It was, and I struggle with it because do you believe God was going to heal you because God is a healer? Or do you believe God was going to heal you because see the amount of work I've done? This amount of the proportion of my life I've invested to the gospel and to the propagation of the faith. Now I have this problem. I have enough, what I call it, righteousness in the bank that if I say you're going to heal me, you're genuinely going to heal me. Because I thought about it deeply. If she wasn't a Christian, she would have sought some quick medical, remedy. But she said, no, God is going to heal me. And she was so sure of that, even until moments before she died. And I struggled with it a lot. Like in the last, that even made the reading of Job, it made it more interesting because like this woman believed against all odds. For years, she struggled with cancer. For years, she believed. At a point, her kids and people around were like, yes, we know you believe in God to heal you, but please, go for chemotherapy. And she did it. And maybe we don't know if that's ignorance or that is staking the whole thing on God. And this is where I want you to draw that balance because there is a point where God is not going to come and tell you, oh, I'm with you in this suffering, but you just have to do something about it. Right? Now, I don't know what Job would have done about his own suffering because he found himself in a corner where he couldn't necessarily do anything. But in today's world where you go through really, really hard times, and there are things you can do, not illegal things, but things you can do that if it ends up working out, maybe like, you know what? Maybe trusting God is a problem. I'll give you an alternate example. Another person I knew who had cancer, um, they went to the UK or so to seek the best healthcare they could, or in America to seek the best healthcare they could, and she was able to get better. And these people, they don't even know how to spell Jesus Christ, And when I just opposed these two events, I'm like, God, what is the game plan here? Why did you let this woman who everybody knew loved you, who everybody knew respected, who everybody knew committed life to you, to die first at a young age, 65, 64, and die this painfully? Like, what story? Like, your name is on the line, God. Like, what exactly are you doing? And I won't lie to you, today I struggle with it because even her kids, which is my friend, struggles with the same concept. And my encouragement to him was, trust in the Lord, trust in the Lord, trust in the Lord. But even while I'm saying that, I'm like, I'm saying it because Paul said it, but, so how do we balance, such a thing, for people who are listening, who are going through really hard times?
For me.
Yeah, no, yeah, please, yeah, speak to it.
So I think as a pastor, this is one of the most difficult things to experience. On one hand, you're celebrating someone who just got a scholarship. On the other hand, you're at a funeral on the same day. But you're seeing two people who love the Lord experience two different experiences. And even when you piece out Job's experience, you can theorize it. But at its core, this is a man who lost everything in one day. As he was getting bad news, someone was bringing, like, just one person survived to bring that news in one single day. It's painful. Grief it's deep and it's painful. And this story of Job just also exposes the fact that we will have many questions, many times never enough answers. Is God good? Is always a question for debate. And what do we define by good at the end of the day? But what I think is, man, there's it, it baffles me because again, I've seen people be healed of sicknesses like through my hands, and there are other people that were even more dear to me, and nothing happened. What happened? Was God unfaithful in that moment? I don't know. I don't want to ask that question, and then he appears in a whirlwind and says, "Who are you, young man?" I don't want that. But to be on the serious note, it's something we'll have to wrestle with, and that's why the beautiful thing about the gospel is God promises more things beyond physical wellness. There's a spiritual wellness that leads to an eternal wellness, eternity. Like everything will still decay at the end of the day. The promise that Christianity holds is we'll all live to again, never to die again. And I think that's even more beautiful. But I think in the pragmatic sense, there are things we can do pragmatically and we can just take action. Okay, there is a medical condition. I don't think it's a lack of faith to seek medical attention. I think both can go hand in hand. Healing actually or miracles were not to sustain the natural. If you're hungry, you don't say, "Be filled, Joshua, in the name of Jesus." No, you eat. So miracles are just an act of benevolence that we are not even entitled to. We are not entitled to miracles. We're not entitled to healings. It's out of God's sovereignty and benevolence we experience these things. So there's a pragmatism, but in all things, our trust must go beyond the flesh and go beyond the now and go into eternity. And anyone who mourns, we mourn with them. The ones we rejoice, we rejoice with them. Anyone who mourns, we mourn with them. We rejoice with those who rejoice.
Yeah. So you're correct, absolutely correct in my opinion, because so I think as human beings, so I referenced this earlier. I was talking to somebody about prayers. So first, let me establish that prayer is not independent of human medicine. In fact, God can work through human medicine to heal somebody. So that's standard.
Yeah.
So from a place of ignorance, it's possible to. There's a place where God had talked about wine. I think it was Isaiah or something. And at the time,
take some little wine for your
wine. Yeah, where Paul told Timothy. But even in Isaiah, I think there was somewhere like that, talking about the balm and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so it's not, even in the Bible endorses human medicine, so to say.
Yeah.
But to the deeper question of whether her not expressing God's miracle is indicative of maybe God abandoning her and her beliefs, even though she was closely associated with his name. I would say that if you look at the Bible, there are instances where, for instance, John the Baptist, where this person ought to have been delivered by God, but what happened? John the Baptist was arrested by Herod. Herodias sent her daughter to dance for the king, and the king asked, "I'll give you anything you want, up to half of my kingdom." And her mother says, "Request his head." He was in prison before his head was requested for. And he sent message to Jesus Christ saying, "I am in prison. You've not done anything for me. Are you sure that you are the Messiah?" And what did Jesus say? Jesus said something, and it says, "Go and tell him that eyes have been opened, ears are hearing." And so what he was saying is, my plan is salvation of humanity. That's God's overarching plan, to take man to a situation that transcends the suffering of this world. That's one. Now, individually, yes, God performs miracles, but we are so limited in understanding, and I think this fits directly into this Job story. Job didn't understand what was going on with him. The limitation of our understanding is, and that's why God questioned him in those later chapters of the book. The limitation of your understanding is such that you cannot exactly comprehend what goes behind the scene and why you are going through what you're going through. And if you realize, the only reason why Job was able to eventually appreciate this was because he heard. Now, a vital part that I think is missing in a lot of our experiences as Christians today is that we don't hear. So, obviously, we read the Bible, we interact with it, but a lot of us kind of interact with it in a theoretical sense. There's no practicality to how we interact with God. For instance, if you've spoken to God about healing, like Paul, this thing buffets me, this messenger of Satan buffets me, take it away. What did God say to him? My grace is sufficient. That was his answer. That was the answer.
So because God could have given that answer and Paul would have heard it.
Yeah, he might not have heard it if he was not familiar with how God spoke. So it's something that I think deprives us of understanding how God works. As Hezekiah, when Hezekiah prayed, God added 15 more years to his age.
Yeah.
And he was told, David prayed. he didn't hear anything. So David prayed for his son. So he had a son from immorality.
Yeah.
The prophet had told him this guy is going to die. But he prayed hoping to change it. Just like, I'm going to draw a parallel between this story and Hezekiah's story. God told Hezekiah, you're going to die, put your house in order. Hezekiah prayed. Now, at his time, he heard from the prophet that, oh, I'm going to add 15 years. With David didn't hear anything, but he was still expecting that, oh, God will perform the miracle. And God can very well perform the miracle if the answer is yes. It's because, here's how I perceive God. Because of his super knowledge, like he knows everything, all-knowing nature of God. There's so many moving parts in the world today that we're not aware about. And because we just don't know enough, we can't tell. For instance, this is just an example, the death of that lady now might lead somebody in the funeral to appreciate something else.
Yeah, right.
And so it's such a very large world that we cannot exactly comprehend why individual decisions are made.
Yeah.
And that's where trust comes in one. And this is why I like Kierkegaard. If you know Kierkegaard, he talks about leap of faith. His leap of faith is you have to have faith and trust beyond reason. Because obviously suffering, anxiety, they would definitely come. They're part of the human experience.
Yeah, right.
So your position as a person is to trust, first of all, that this God is sovereign and he cares and he can help me through it. One. Two, even if he doesn't, like the Hebrew boys, you still trust him because you don't trust him because of what he can do for you. So even if he doesn't, you still trust him. Then three, the most important for me is the fact that I need to hear what he's saying in this time. That's how I see it. If I can hear what he's saying, then I know what to do. Because if I trust him that he cares for me, then I know that there's a bigger plan. And like he referenced, this world is beyond this physical world. There's a spiritual realm. Paul says, encourage yourself. Those that people died in Paul's church. Paul healed a lot of people, but people still died. And he said, encourage yourselves with the saying that God's going to come back.
Yes. You know, what of you, and thank you, like what you of you said
I like hearing you speak, man. Yeah.
is, so what you have said is it's brilliant. You know, it brings me to the very final part of this. What I usually say is we must trust in something transcendent, and not only should we trust in, we must have our eyes fixed on it. And I find it and I find it interesting because we did the Man Search for Meaning, right? Man Search for Meaning book, and you saw that the reason why Viktor Frankl survived the concentration camp, he had not necessarily transcendent, but something beyond the concentration camp.
Yeah.
Right. And I see that when we are able to look at something, hope on something that is beyond our reach and our physical reach, we're able to trust more.
Yeah.
We're able to say, okay, fine. You know, there's this line in Jordan Peterson's book, I think, The 12 Rules of Life. He says, they are no atheists. They are no atheists. They are just people who don't know the God they serve. Something around that line. And for me, that's just very brilliant, because at the end of the day, you know, and Freddie Dostoevsky said the same thing. He said, man always wants to serve something. It is in the innate propensity of the human mind to look up to something, to worship something. And not but not to also, you know, when I did a bit of study on Buddhism, there's a line that I have and that said, attachment is the key of all suffering. And what I see with all these things is that suffering at the end of the day, especially for someone like Job. Now, I'm not trying to judge him, but it's like at what God was doing, and this is where I'm making my concluding argument or statement, was that Job had some certain level of trust and hope in the things he had. Right? I mean, the cattle and the cows, and you know, and every morning, for someone to wake up every morning to make sacrifices for his children, meaning that he lived in that consciousness, that they were his light. And yes, he was a righteous man, like the Bible said. Maybe righteous not in comparison to God, not as looking unto God, but righteous compared to man. We can talk about, you know, what those definitions are. But what I see in the entire story of Job was that God moved his focus from the things that he had to him who is all things. And the moment he heard from God, he was able to, so the suffering just disappeared. And I think that's the thing that made the people in the early church go through a lot of persecution, and they didn't change their faith. You know, the Christians have been persecuted as far back, and they didn't change, because every single time They knew where they were going to. When Peter and the disciples were killed, they did that happily. They rendered their lives, knowing that there's somewhere better I'm going to, and they didn't hold on to it. When I went through my depression, one of the reasons why I went through it was everything I hoped on failed. And not God, but everything I hoped for. The job and the work and loved ones, and they all failed. And because I didn't feel depressed because God was in there, I felt depressed because I hoped on things that failed. And what you of you said is absolutely correct. Because what you find out is that when you hope on things that are transcendent, things that are beyond the physical, it may be hard, but you always sort of draw your hope from it. And that's where you see Job goes through the suffering, and then we see a kind of suffering again in the New Testament with Christ. So he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he was like, let this cup pass away from me, but that will. Because what happens what Christ did was Christ saw the end. He had a hope in something more transcendent. He knew that there was something beyond whatever he was going to go through right now. And you see, Paul mentioned the same thing. Said the sufferings of this present age is nothing compared to the glory that will come from them. Might that sound like a pastor, but my point is, like, but my point is, what you see in the whole, and I'm saying this to my audience so that you see, this is some of the things you can help when you go through suffering. Is you have to look beyond, what you're going through, and you see this throughout scriptures where when God is using a particular man and he's going through the hard time, one of the things that God does is to show him the destination. You see this with Joseph. Joseph sees where he's going to, and then he starts having suffering. And then Joseph realizes this is where I'm going to, and kind of trust God in that. And you see that with Abraham, where before God starts anything, everybody said, look into the skies, and you see that's a country. And I find it one last point, and I'll let you guys say your final point. You see the same thing with Gideon. Gideon was like, how am I going to win this war? How am I going to win this war? And even to the very day of the war, he said, you know what? Send one of your servants to the cave, and you will hear other people talk about the fact that you are going to win. So what I see is that God does this thing with his people where he's always trying to show them what they should hope on. If you are able to see this, then what you're going through becomes bearable. It becomes like that scene ameliorates so. And I think that's what the thing he said. You see, you intimated that when he said about the hearing thing, that you have to hear. So a lot of times when you go through something, you have to say, okay. And again, I said this in my firefly effect when you in the academy, where you have to look beyond what you're going through. It's okay. There is something more than this. I'm just a pixel in this entire picture. And then you appreciate that role and you hope on the greater picture rather than just a simple pixel. So I'm going to give you a minute or 2 minutes to run your conclusive argument, what you think of the book. I know you have said that before, just to emphasize that. And one of the things you want our listeners to take, the most important thing they should take home with, and your encouragement, if they should read the book, and the same thing for you, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for the privilege to talk about this. I think this book is so robust, but there's so much hope in this book as well. I feel like yeah, let me look at you guys. So one thing that I think everyone is taking away from this is Elroy. God actually sees. Like, don't, in the silence, in the darkness, God sees. He knows what you're going through even more than you do. He understands it perfectly well, and he can be trusted. He can be trusted. And I feel like we are very tempted to point fingers many times when we go through, these issues, just like the friends of Job did. This is probably the problem. We speculate a lot. For example, why did that guy cheat on me? Right? Is it me that's the problem? Is it him that's the problem? Why did God allow it? Some people are very quick to point the finger at God every time. But this book really distinguishes the difference. Who brought about bad things? The devil. He initiated it. We at least had a glimpse. It's a prophetic book in many ways, especially the first chapter, because the writer, now, we don't know who the writer could be. It doesn't sound like it's Job. Many people traditionally speculate it's Moses, right? And it makes sense because of how he wrote Genesis and all of that.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah,
exactly. The setting of Job. So it makes sense. but like we have a glimpse into the celestial realm, what could be happening. And this was not a one-off. I think this is a daily experience. The prince of the power of the air, that's why he's in that realm. He's doing this work actively on everyone's account, wreaking havoc, looking for whom to devour. Not God. God is not looking to devour. He's rather making beauty out of the ashes, which he established in the life of Job as he kept trusting God through those problems. So just a reminder before we point the fingers, God, why? Why did you? Can we pause and see truly, okay, who is responsible for this? Who has the track record of being responsible for evil, and who has a track record of being good? Bible says God is good. There in him is light. There is no shadow of turning. He does not change. He is consistent. He's immutable in his goodness. And I think that's where we can then predicate our trust upon, because he's consistently good, so we can trust him and hope for not just a better future here on earth, but even beyond the earth. So if you're in a situation where you're going through it, I want to encourage you. God sees you. He's in your boat. The storms will rage heavily, but you can be rest assured God has your back. He will make beauty out of that ugly situation.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I agree with everything he said. In fact, he's covered the field. But I'll just say three things which I noted. So from God's final interaction with Job, I would say the most important thing, or I would like to conclude by saying the attitude that we have towards suffering is extremely important. And there are three things that I noted. That's trust rather than comprehension. So even when you don't understand, it's a vital part of human experience to trust that things will work out and that there's somebody who cares for you. That's one very important thing. And I think it's something that allows you go through the most daunting of experiences without crumbling. So when you have that trust that there's light at the end of the tunnel, just like Franco did, it's somehow works with your mind to just surmount the most difficult situation. Now, the second thing I would say is faith rather than understanding the specific situation. So when you have faith, even in the midst of really dark situations, then it's possible for you to get ahead of it and even come out stronger than you went in that situation. And then endurance rather than accusation. Looking for who to blame is an easy thing to fall back to when you're going through something. But based on God's interaction, the accusation really doesn't help you if you think about it. Obviously, it helps you cope because now you can say, it's not my fault. All these things are happening to me. It's not my fault. But when you focus more on enduring, staying there, learning the lessons that need to be learned even from specific situations, because I'm sure even if it was not highlighted in the text, there are specific lessons that Job needed to learn even from the experience that he went through. And so if you focus more on the lessons to be learned and how to endure and come out of this situation, I feel like you'll be better for it even when you're out of that particular thing that you're going through. Yeah. And so like he did, I would like to encourage everyone. Suffering is part of human experience. Don't look at suffering as something that has come.
Let's talk to them.
Don't look at suffering as something that you're going through and it's just peculiar to you. Yeah. Everyone goes through suffering. Even Jesus Christ did. Jesus Christ, who is God, went through suffering. Yeah. But in fact, it's a biblical motif for human beings to go through suffering. But what is promised is that as a human being, you've been created stronger than those sufferings, and that you're able to surmount it. It says you will not get something harder than you can bear. And so know that if you persist, if you endure, then you come out better for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. And thank you all for listening. And
I have one question.
Yes.
What job did Job do?
What job did Job?
That's a question for all of us to think about.
They had so much money, yeah?
Yeah.
No.
But also,
there's a dad joke in it.
Is it?
Joke. Oh, wow.
So, guys, thank you all so much for joining and listening, and thank you to the speakers. Just to let you know what's going on in the Nebula, we have our website. It's up now, thenebulahouse.com. Please go to the website and subscribe to our newsletter. We have the Nebula House Academy, which is going to be starting from the 6th of February. That's a Friday next week. And we have the 30 Days Word Series. And please subscribe, follow, comment, and share. And next month, for the month of February, we have a very interesting book. That's Notes from Underground by Freddie Dostoevsky. Again, it's around the same theme. Existentialism, suffering, And just to give you a bit of a teaser, so you would go through the book. It's a man who was in solitary confinement and how he was able to navigate that particular period through friendship. Right now, we have talked about Job, who had that connection with God, and then you're going to have surviving suffering through friendship. So we'll see next. We'll see last Saturday of the month in February, and hopefully by then you have read these books and hopefully you are changed by the book. Thank you all so much for joining.